Hey, everybody. Wow. I have to say, this was the greatest Super Bowl I have ever seen. The greatest Super Bowl ever played. It started out the 49ers. The greatest Super Bowl ever played. And I did that so I could. It started out magnificently. If you're a 49ers fan. Now, how it turned out is something else. And so that's why I turned our resident NFL draft expert, Bill Chack, up. I was about to say Bill Chackus. Bill Carroll. Two peas in the same pot almost. But at any rate, Bill, what say you about this Super Bowl?
It was a solid, well played Super Bowl. I think that for pure drama, there's three or four I'd put above it. Obviously, the Malcolm Butler play on the right on the end zone where some of you were thinking that Marshawn Lynch was going to get the ball, and obviously the Santonio Holmes play in the corner of the end zone certainly had more drama. Even the Nick Foles, right? The Eagles Super Bowl. Where the Cinderella story of Nick Foles overcomes the Cinderella story of Thomas Edward Patrick Brady, the 199th selection overall in his draft year, are all probably a little more drama packed than this one. And frankly, this one turned out the way a lot of people suspected it would. My prediction almost nailed it, and lots of other people's predictions almost nailed it. I was off by 2 points for each team. I had this game ending 27 to 24, I believe, for the 49ers.
But did any overtime?
I guess I didn't necessarily foresee overtime, but overtime by itself, especially the way they play overtime now, doesn't add as much to the drama. Now, in the old sudden death days, it definitely added quite a bit to the drama. But nowadays, it's essentially just extra time. So it doesn't have the same, nail biting kind of quality that sudden death overtime brought with it.
Oh, I respectfully disagree. And I see what you're saying about the time part, but Bill, here's where it gets me. It had, instead of having that one moment, it had a bunch of moments. The 4th and 2 that the Chiefs barely picked up. The fourth down the Niners didn't pick up off of, once again, this questionable play calling where now some people say, I'd love to hear your view, hey, the 49ers should have ran more. I felt the 49ers needed ultra short passing plays, and I've said this before, and it's missing from their repertoire. That came back to haunt them. But what do you think about it? Why do you think the 49ers faltered?
Well, there's two things. The two main things are Steve Spagnuolo and Andy Reid. When it's all said and done, Andy Reid will be remembered, and rightly so, as one of the top 5 or 6 coaches in the history of the NFL. And Steve Spagnuolo, hopefully, will be remembered as one of the top 5 or 6 defensive coordinators in the history of the NFL. Each of those guys are particularly great at adjusting to the other team's adjustments. Once you've adjusted to whatever they're doing originally, they have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, a plan E, a plan F. They are really, really, really good at saying and anticipating, okay, here's what it is that you're going to do. Here's what we're going to do to that. Then when you change, the next thing you do, here's the counter we already have prepared. And I can almost promise you that at some point in defensive meetings, Steve Spagnuolo said to his team, we're going to greatly limit Ayuk. We're going to keep Kittle under control. We're going to not really be able to limit McCaffrey, but keep McCaffrey from taking the game over. And if Juwan Jennings beats us, we just lose, right? And Juwan Jennings gave him a good scare, but that was the guy they said, we're going to let him do what he's going to do. We don't believe Juwan Jennings can beat us. We believe Christian McCaffrey can beat us. We believe George Kittle can beat us. Deebo Samuel maybe even. Brandon Ayuk possibly. But we don't believe Juwan Jennings can beat us. So they have a superb, and I mean superb secondary. And once again, if people didn't know this, I hope they realize how good Trent McDuffie is on his way to being a perennial Pro Bowler and a guy who should probably be a 3 or 4 time All Pro before his career ends. And then when you look at Snead, I mean, L'Jarius Snead is a guy who's already been a couple of times first team All Pro, and he's got a couple more of those left in his career. So between the two of them, I think 7 to 10 All Pros may be had between that duo of McDuffie and Snead. And so when you have that, you can essentially not erase, but you can greatly reduce the effectiveness of at least two of the receiving targets of the other team. They do a really good job of jumping in and out of various combo zones and man. And a couple of times they even managed to get the receivers, like they got Ayuk one time, to react when they would suddenly walk up, right, looking like they're going to be in soft zone, and suddenly walk up on them like being man pressed. And it's just a natural human instinct. This person comes walking towards you to flinch, right? And so you're able to draw, a false start penalty that way. That in a game this close, little things matter so much. The other thing that's very important to me, and they did start trying to get the quick passing game, but sometimes the pressure got so quickly. Even the quick passing game, it was disrupted because Purdy was rocking back, trying to create space by leaning and throwing off his back foot. And I don't know if you ever try to throw football off your back foot before, Zinni. Even if you have an extremely strong,
it's hard.
Even if you have an extremely strong arm, and Purdy doesn't have an extremely strong arm, he has I would say, maybe 4 or 5% above average NFL quarterback arm. He's in that 54th or so percentile in arm strength, right? Which is enough. You can have a nice career. And once again, lots of guys who have great careers were right in that area, 55, 52 percentile arm strength. But when you combine being a smaller statured quarterback and having, an arm that's maybe just a baby bit above average, when you aren't throwing from a solid base, that's how you get those tip ball interceptions. That's how you get, or balls that fall at the feet of the receiver, all those other things, right? Or balls they have to react to by reaching back. And now, if you do have a lot of timing plays where this block is hitting here and you are going to cut inside of it, well, the half second it took you to do this means that guy comes back off the block and hits you before you make the cut.
Yeah.
So the thing about those precision short passing plays is everything has to work and it has to happen fast. That immediate pressure they're able to get a few times, so quick that even on passes that were 4 air yards, the quarterback's, doing this. Those plays don't work. Steve Spagnuolo is great at dialing up the exact pressure at the exact right time. He's one of the best at timing up blitzes I've seen, and I've been watching the game since 1971. So I can't think of 3 or 4 people I'd take above him in terms of if someone had to call a blitz to save the life of a child, I would say Steve Spagnuolo would be able to first 3 or 4 guys I would think of to call to make that blitz call. But Steve Wilks, before I depart, land the plane, Steve Wilks also deserves his flowers as well.
Yeah.
When you
he really did. Yeah.
When you frustrate one of the great offenses that we will ever see, this offense that we're seeing that the Chiefs run, and it's changed, right? It's they've had 2 or 3 different versions of it. They had an Alex Smith version of it.
Yep.
Then they had an early Mahomes version of it, and now they have a later, and then eventually they're gonna have a veteran Mahomes version of it, where he has a little less physical ability, but his brain is sped up. So they'll have yet another version of it. But in the next 4 years, they're going to start to transition from the young Mahomes to the veteran Mahomes, and then eventually the in-stage Mahomes version of their offense. But each time the offense evolves, it evolves in a way that still creates a certain amount of uncertainty in the defense. And Steve Wilks saw through so many things. And while they gave up a handful, I mean, literally a handful of big plays, a couple of decent-sized shots to Watson, I think they had about a couple of 9-yard passes to Pacheco. Pacheco had an 11-yard run. But, I mean, in terms of those big chunk plays, they had that 152-yarder was the only true, big explosive they gave up the whole game. Steve Wilks coached his butt off. And I hope that isn't lost, right, in all the discussion of Mahomes and Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce and all that cool stuff, and Andy Reid. Steve Wilks deserves another chance to be a head coach. Steve Wilks is one of the best defensive minds in football.
Yep.
And most teams, even with the talent, most coaches would not have been able to hold Mahomes and that offense to, only 22 points in overtime.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize how
3 points in the first half, if you think about it.
Yep. And isn't it all due to Steve Wilkes, but it's a lot due to Steve Wilkes, because look at how they had sort of that mesh in terms of their pass rush, right?
Mm-hmm.
It didn't, they refused to get into individualized pass rushing. These guys would essentially try to sync up so that my shoulder is about a foot from your shoulder and a foot from your shoulder as we come forward. Because if one guy breaks because he gets greedy and thinks, oh, I'm about to sack Pat Mahomes in the Super Bowl, he slides to the left or slides to the right, and you miss him, and then he steps up in the pocket and right?
Yeah.
So hats off to both defensive coordinators and both defenses.
Now, having said all that, where do you put Kyle Shanahan? And then, of course, his passing game coordinator. But since Shanahan was really the guy that calls the plays, I'll just have to stop there. Where do you put Kyle Shanahan in all this?
It's like asking, where do you put all those coaches that ran into the Jordan-led Bulls? Or where do you put the coaches that ran into the Kobe Shaq Lakers? Sometimes you just run into this juggernaut. He didn't call a bad game. While there are some things you could certainly quibble with and tweak and whatever, he's up against a fantastic defense, right? I hope people, like I said, I just kept praising these two defenses. These aren't okay or decent defenses. These are great, especially in this era of football where offenses have all the advantages.
Yeah.
They have. Yeah. To be able to frustrate both of these offenses, very impressive. This is a good offense. The 49ers had a good plan, and they managed to create some good opportunities. And they frankly didn't maximize some of them as much as they could have or should have. And some of it is, once again, they have a young quarterback. I mean, Brock Purdy's not done being who he's going to be. He's going to be better next year and better the year after that. He's a young quarterback. He just reached, number 20 or 21 in starts of his career, something like that. So he's basically just a few games out of being a rookie.
And on that note, let's discuss his stats. 23 of 38, 255 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. Patrick Mahomes, by contrast, 34 of 46 passes, 333 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. What do you make of that?
It's almost exactly what I thought would happen. I mean, these two teams had a plan to do the things that they did. And one team had Pat Mahomes, which gives you an unfair advantage over the other team almost every game you play. And once again, when you have Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo and Patrick Mahomes, the other team has to do everything right, Cindy. Yep. Everything right.
Yep.
And so these little mistakes, right? A ball bangs off of Darryl Suter's, ankle, and Ray McCloud tries to grab it. That's your game right there, Zenny.
Yeah, that was right.
It doesn't take a lot. It just takes one little thing. It's like when you're serving,
I'm yelling, "Stay away from it! Stay away from it! Stay away from it!" I'm like, "Oh man, you gotta be kidding me!" Yeah,
It's like you're playing on like you've got one match point against Novak Djokovic, right? And you double fault, right? I mean, it doesn't take much, right? You open that door a little bit and you're done. That's it. That's all she wrote.
Yeah, I hope the 49ers don't think of this as a failure, because once again, they were in, and I'll say this again, the greatest Super Bowl ever played, period. And that's how it's going to be regarded. That's how it's going to go down. And it's difficult to avoid that. And it was a game that had 4 full lead changes throughout. And it was a game that had key injuries on both it was a game that had questionable, of course, penalty calls. It had everything. It was almost a microcosm of an NFL season that saw a number of teams, and I believe the overall stat, finish with close margins between the winner and the loser. Ta-da! How fitting to end the 2004 season with that characteristic than to have a game with that same characteristic. That's absolutely wild. And not only that, it says to me that, okay, the 49ers we're at this place where if I'm John Lynch and Jed York and the Niners president, I'm thinking, look, I should be thinking, this is what I should be thinking. Hey, we did a great job. We have the nucleus to rebuild and reload again with the hopes of seeing the Chiefs again and stopping their three-peat. So we become antidote. We become the antidote to the three-peat. And I would look at it that way if I were them, because they have a great nucleus of people. They have a great nucleus of talent. They have some people that are, frayed here and there, but not many. And they had, bless you, at the center of it, a young quarterback that is every bit the modern Joe Montana. He just doesn't have the Super Bowl trophy yet. That's all.
Sure. And while I don't know if I'm ready to push this one up above, say, Super Bowl 34 with the, this game ends as Mason is trying to stretch the ball. Kevin Dyson trying to stretch the ball, over the end zone as Robert Jones just pulls him down. Or, to go old school a little bit. One of my favorites.
I would say I was at that game. That was my first Super Bowl. And I was in the opposite end zone, sitting next to this dude who kept singing this Southern song. He would not stop all game long. Oh, Bill, it was killing me. And, but I just thought, I'm at the Super Bowl. And so then I went to find my friend Beth, and we wound up in the Raiders box where Jerry Jones and Al Davis were entertaining some people. I'll leave it at that. My point is that was... And also, it was the Steve McNair Super Bowl, where McNair started off shaky, but then, hey, Jeff Fisher discovered, hey, I've got a guy that can do a mix of runs and short passes and hit deep when necessary, and I'm going to do that. And once he started treating Steve McNair like the field journal he was, they got better. That one play and why they called it outside the end zone. Do you realize when they called the play inside the end zone where the cut was in the touchdown, we would have had a different conversation.
Right. And so the greatest show on turf, would have ended up without a Super Bowl because, of course, the next year they get upset.
Yeah.
Patriots. But think about the two super teams of the 70s meeting in Super Bowl 13. I think a lot of people have that way up the top with the Steelers 35-31. Over the Cowboys.
I'm glad you said that. I have to say it because that game was just about 2.5 years after I became a Dallas Cowboys fan. I was getting the Dallas Cowboys Week, which was this publication that had the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders in the middle and a lot of great conversations about the flex defense and personal. Okay. I hated the Steelers. Hated. I hadn't seen Super Bowl 10. Super Bowl 11 was my first game. Super Bowl 12 was my second game. That was the Cowboys clobbering the Broncos. And then there was Super Bowl 13. I remember where we were. We were on Brookdale in Oakland. Mom was at work. Nobody but me watching the game. And when Jackie Smith when Jackie Smith dropped the pass he was supposed to catch, I turned the set off. I didn't want to, I was upset. I was a kid. I was crying. I couldn't believe it. Like, oh my Lord,
Bless his heart. He's the sickest man in America. I remember the call. Yeah.
I put this game on par with that one, but a little better because it didn't. It's better because the 49ers were actually engaged in a true war, whereas the Cowboys are trying to come back. And they fell 4 points short, trying to come out of a hole, and use tactics that today they wouldn't have used. Like, for example, a shotgun, leaving your people in, throwing these mindlessly deep throws without timing. A time pass would have beaten the Steelers. The Cowboys could have won that game. I take that game as an example of how the Cowboys' offense was not sufficiently designed from a timing standpoint to attack its foes, and that was a big, big weakness. But greatest game ever, one of them? Definitely. But this game, better than that? Absolutely. What do you think?
I think amongst the lower scoring Super Bowls, right, the ones that aren't bing, 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 I mentioned obviously the greatest show on turf, prevailing in the Kevin Dyson, Robert Jones, 2.5 or whatever, yards or 3 yards short is probably one of the most exciting lower scoring Super Bowls. And then obviously 42, right? With the helmet catch game. It
Right.
has to be up there amongst the most exciting lower, defensive sort of focused. And obviously I mentioned earlier, the Malcolm Smith, that's 40, 49, right? Which comes down to the last play of the game. And, Malcolm Butler at that time, a rather lightly regarded player. I mean, not a person that most people had at sort of the top of their list of people to watch, makes the play that saves the game. I think those are ones that, most people have at or near the top. But this is, I would say probably in that range. And like I said, amongst the higher scoring ones, obviously, is the Eagles Patriots, where it's just back forth, back forth, back forth, back forth.
Well, by the way, go ahead. I'll just keep that on your hat.
Well, I'm just saying that as a person who loves defense, while that was an exciting game, it wasn't my cup of tea. But it was, once again, the coolness of the unlikely story of Nick Foles, leading the underdog Eagles over, of course, the team, that people were just assuming was going to steamroll them in the Patriots. That had the extra added excitement of one team being a significant underdog. These teams are
has you feeling out of sync. Quick Trip has just what you need.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
These teams are extremely tightly matched, and the game played out exactly as to prove how closely matched these teams are.
When the morning has you feeling
sorry about that. Okay, let me say this. There is a breakdown of statistics. Okay, Niners passing. Brock Purdy, I repeated what he was, 255. Juwan Jennings had the one pass for 21 yards and a touchdown. Team passing 272 yards. Average per catch, 7.1, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. McCaffrey, the rushing. McCaffrey, 22 carries, 80 yards, 3.6 yard average. Which, when you start to think about the game in its entirety and you see that stat and you see the average, you say, wait a minute. It looked like he gained more yards than that.
Well, he also had several negative runs there. And shout out to, once
Great
again,
point.
Not only, I talked about the defensive coordinator, but the actual defensive players. Now, Chris Jones is fantastic. I mean, if not for Aaron Donald, he'd be remembered as one of the great defensive tackles of the era. He has to sort of ride in Donald's shadow, but he's great. And then look at what the other guys like Trevon Wharton and Mike Pennell did. Rather unsung, but those other guys are part of that interior rotation. They only rotate about 3 guys on the interior. And they play high energy. Those guys play high energy football. So shout out to those 3 guys on the interior. And then on the exterior, with the injury to Charles Omenihu, they really had a sort of short rotation. And once again, I mean, Felix Anadiki Izoma played well, and obviously George Karlaftis played well. And then Chris Jones also kicks outside. He was part of that outside rush rotation. His conditioning for a man who's 308 pounds must be exceptional for him to play as many snaps as he does at high level.
Okay, so we've got, as we go through this, I would say let's go through some of the comments that are coming out through Twitter. One of them is that, well, first of all, before we go to the comments, let's get to the biggest news of all, courtesy directly of the National Football League email an hour ago to Zenny 62 Media. Patrick Mahomes wins Pete Rozelle Trophy as Super Bowl 58 Most Valuable Player. And it reads, Kansas City quarterback Patrick Mahomes was voted the winner of the Pete Rozelle Trophy awarded to the Super Bowl 58 Most Valuable Player. Mahomes completed 34 of 46 attempts, 73.6%, 9% of his passes, for 333 yards and 2 touchdowns with a 99.3 rating and added 66 rushing yards in helping the Chiefs, overcome a 10-point deficit en route to a 25-22 overtime win in Super Bowl 58. It marked the second Super Bowl ever to go to overtime as the Chiefs became, and I stand corrected because I said it was the first, it wasn't. So,
no, of course it wasn't. Because we just talked about the Eagles.
Right. The Eagles was the first one. And sorry, folks, drain damage ensues. Happens. At any rate, the Chiefs became the first team, or watching Barbie on an all-night flight without falling asleep. At any rate, it was a good movie. And dealing with the fact that you hear that rumble, yes, it's a storm, folks. Huh. So all that put together and got what I blurted out accidentally. My apologies. Please accept them. Now, the Chiefs became the first team to repeat as Super Bowl champion since the 2003-04 New England Patriots. Kansas City recorded the seventh comeback of 10 or more points in a Super Bowl, including the team's Super Bowl Super Bowl 54 and 58 victories. Mahomes, who is also named Super Bowl 54 and 58 MVP, is the third player ever to win 3 Super Bowl Most Valuable Player awards, joining Tom Brady 5 and Pro Bowl Hall of Famer Joe Montana 3. He is the third player ever, according to the NFL, as I'm reading their letter to me, to be named Super Bowl MVP in consecutive seasons, joining Pro Football Hall of Famers Bart Starr, Super Bowl 1 and 2, and Terry Bradshaw, Super Bowls 13 and 14. Mahomes is the 5th quarterback with at least 3 Super Bowl titles, joining Brady 7, as well as Pro Football Hall of Famers Bradshaw 4, Montana 4, and Troy Aikman 3. It marks the 3rd time that a quarterback has been named Super Bowl Most Valuable Player. Mahomes recorded his 15th career postseason win, trailing only Brady 35 and Montana 16 for the most postseason wins by a quarterback all time. The award is chosen by a panel comprised of 16 media members, CBS and Westwood One analysts, media in Las Vegas, Kansas City, and San Francisco. Pro Football Writers Association appointed pool reporters that have attended team practice sessions during Super Bowl week. Past Pro Football Writers of America presidents, at-large members of the national media, and fans interactively through the National Football League's official website, NFL.com. What do you think about that?
Well, offensive players, really quarterbacks, always, the thumbs on the scale for them. Frankly, if I had to pick one player that I thought was the most valuable, it's probably Chris Jones.
Yeah.
If you just, once again, I can't wait to get my hands on the All-22. But we talked about how you felt like McCaffrey had way more yards rushing than 86.
Sure.
Look at what happens on the interior of that defense on several plays that are bounced outside and then pulled down, 2-3 yards in the backfield.
Yeah.
If you were to take away those negative yards plays, McCaffrey's well over 100 yards. They not only disrupted that, but also that once again, that short passing game you're talking about got disrupted by that interior pressure. When you're only taking, maybe one step back, sometimes if you're in the gun, or if you're under center, 3 steps back, and then boom, when your back foot hits, there's already somebody, with their fingertips inches away from you. Yeah, that disrupts things. And even if you are, Ben Roethlisberger in his prime, you're going to be slightly less effective. But Once again, as we talked about, Mr. Purdy is not a big, strong guy. As NFL quarterbacks go, he's a big, strong human. But he would stand out amongst people, but not amongst NFL quarterbacks. He's on the smaller side of NFL quarterbacks. So I think he's something like the 5th or 6th smallest NFL quarterback right now, starting NFL quarterback. So he's not particularly large. And so whether it be Chris Jones or Felix Anudike-Uzomah or George Karlaftis or any of those guys are making, and even some of the blitzers like Nick Lofton, not Lofton, but Nick Bolton, or even some of the safeties come in, a guy like Eric Reed. Those are all people bigger than him. And he is a guy will hang in there, will take hits, but once again, your precision, even no matter how tough you are, your precision is not going to be there. Your touch is going to be there. And as you said, on those short passes that function almost like runs, even if the ball gets there, if it takes longer than planned or is off target, now all that stuff that was aligned to make it work is no longer aligned. You're getting tackled 2 or 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Once again, sort of like with we talked about McCaffrey. Purdy might not have broken 300, but he probably would have broken 280 if not for the fact that guys are getting tackled at or behind the line of scrimmage on some of those short passes too. So the same thing that works against the run game also works against short passes that act like runs.
Right.
If you keep getting that upfield pressure and throwing blockers into the way, as opposed to them driving you forward or driving you laterally in the case of some of the blocking schemes. Now, those plays break down and they get either 0 yards or less than 0 yards. And negative plays or plays that go for 0 yards change what happens on the next play. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's how you change the game plan of the other team. If they get 4 yards on that play, the play that's coming next is a much more disadvantageous play to you as a defense. That's why you always want to get to 2nd and long, 3rd and long.
So if that's the case, let me say this, because I will actually determine that next. I will calculate that out, and we'll have another live stream on it, this week. I know you've got to get up early.
I do. I have to get up very early. I'll be head out the road to work in about 6 hours and 20 something minutes.
And I am exhausted from a fantastic trip. I want to thank Lee Steinberg and his staff, particularly Alex Layton and Jessica, whose name I never got. She was the production manager. Wonderful, wonderful people. And, of course, the 49ers legendary tight end, Charlie Young, who was nice enough to come over and sit with my mom and make sure she had company while I was doing interviews, buzzing around here and there, making sure she got food and making sure she got drink as well. Thank you, Charlie. Much appreciated. All right, folks. Bill, thanks, man. Live long and prosper in your world.
Indeed. Same to you.
Or in the parlance of the game, perspire, I think. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'll see you again soon, my friend.
Yeah. That was Trick, wasn't it?